Hello and good evening or good morning or good afternoon or whatever time it is at your place. Welcome to this last virtual DDD meetup of this year. With me is Marco and Christina from the organization and a few other people who come and join in. Today will be pretty simple. There's a Miro board link in the chat or on Zoom or on YouTube. And you can, join any way you like. You can chat, but you can also just talk with each other. It will be an open discussion. That will be it. So there's already a few topics on there. And there was a question on Twitter, right, Christina? Shall we start with that?
Yeah, well, why not? I just wanted to mention the drinks are on you.
Yes, I got my Kilkenny mug with tea in it. Jasmine tea.
I got a red wine that I stole from my wife.
Great. Curious combination.
SpaceX with chocolate inside. Pfizer chocolate
inside. Nice.
Cheers.
Cheers.
That's Mars. Well, part of it.
Oh, with
the crash here,
with this Log4j issue.
Exactly.
Cool. So, and here we have Rebecca. So let's start with the first question. Go ahead, Christina. So for everyone joining, just join the Miro, please, and we can put topics there. We can use it as a whiteboard, and everyone can reach it. So, go ahead, Christina.
I saw an interesting question from a new addicted to the DD. It was interesting, the whole topic, because she find out about the book and started to read it. And she has to tweet because every second page is an aha experience. This was great. And this was her first question. Bounded context, I don't see it because of your name. What are bounded contexts? Is this a sign that if your domain has a rich language, then do you split it in bounded contexts? And for the start, it's question easy to answer, but after that I was thinking about the whole afternoon and I sent 2 answers. And I think it is a very good question for everybody, for beginners and advanced. Too.
So are they there for when the domain is too large for a single ubiquitous language? Before I let it go, and I hear Dimitri, you have some noise, so if you can mute yourself, please do so. So I'll start with one comment my wife always makes, and she has a background in anthropology, but I started explaining the concept of a ubiquitous language, and she was laughing. Because in anthropology, they say language is fluid, so good luck with your consistent language. So I believe it is a goal on itself, but you will never reach the goal of a ubiquitous language, but you need to work on it continuously. That's what I think. But then is it too large for a single ubiquitous language? That's an interesting question. Who has some takes on it?
Well, I think when you say language is fluid, I think that is a different dimension, right? It's of course, language is fluid even within a bounded context. Language can evolve over time, and you refactor to deeper insight, right? When you learn more about the domain, you change your language, you evolve it over time. And you might even uncover over time again that within your bounded context, you have a specific language, but there is a lot of friction and discussion. So maybe there is more than one context boundary. So you actually split into 2 contexts. And I would say the goal of bounded context is not to design a language, but that is a defining heuristic. It's like when you see that language has been used differently, that is a good heuristic to split your context alongside. So it's the other way around. The purpose is not to have a clearly defined language, but the purpose is to have a clearly defined mental model that you can share amongst each other within the group producing something. So a clearly defined mental model needs to be communicated, and for that we need language. And if we don't understand what we mean by words, we need to define first, right? So this is where the language becomes ubiquitous within a bounded context. So we agree on terms and we know that it's fuzzy. So we're not assuming that our language is perfect and crisp and absolutely defined. We know it's fuzzy, but this is our fuzzy mess. And we have a boundary towards the other party who also has a fuzzy mess. And we even have an interconnection between them. So bounded contexts, I think, are an approach to actually split a giant mental model, say this is how we build the solution, into smaller mental models that you can reason about in isolation using your ubiquitous language, which is sharp enough to be useful, but fuzzy still because it's based on words and human interpretation. And it evolves and sharpens over time.
My second answer to her was something like this. Yes, it is a hint. It is like in math. If you test your equation, then you have this is your test. If your language is consistent, then you are on the right way. But it is not the meaning and not the means, and not you cannot make a one-on-one relationship. And what I like the most is what your wife said, Kenny. I love it that language evolves because my product evolves too. So if I would, this is why I hate glossaries, because glossaries are static. They are put somewhere. In best cases, people are reading them, but they are valid for the moment, for now, and maybe for a month. But then we learn something, and then the glossaries are already not valid anymore, or they lose their sharpness. But I accept that you need something to put your definitions there.
But
so who sees it different than Marco and Christine? I would like to know. I see Rebecca was already unmuting herself.
So I actually think looking at glossaries, and I don't hate them as much as you do, Christina, because they're a tool, not the end result. But if I see something where in this case we mean this, and in this case we mean that, that's a really good indicator of a different. So it's interesting that people think that the language of a particular bounded context should go and apply in every case. And then when you find, oh, for us, a customer means this, or if we're in the rail yard, when we build up a consist, it is this, that's a set of cars in a train, but they don't even use the word train. But if they have three different meanings for consist, you're going, wait a minute, you're trying to think that you're unifying this language so it serves your whole business, but just doesn't. So when I see different terms used and people say, in this case, we mean that, that's a real good indicator. Now, people can speak different dialects of the same language, which is sometimes perplexing. We call it this, you call it that, but it's when they have overlapping definitions.
Yeah.
So should we?
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So do you think we should replace every single if by different domains?
No, of course not.
So where do you put the cursor on this?
Well, I think the behavior is very different, and it's like tiny variations in how we think about something. It's a judgment call. But when you start saying, oh, here's how we're building up a consist in these kind of cases, and it's like it would be easier to untangle them. Maybe you have to do some experiments. Then it would make sense to me. But it's not always like I know exactly what to do when we talk about customers or consists differently.
So when it's a tiny variation, it's inside a small behavior, then it's when it's a little bit bigger, it's like maybe using scoff, overloading, and when it's even bigger, then it's probably another domain, something like that. And we have a wide palette of tools.
And it's all a judgment call.
Of course.
I like the mental model of mitosis in this case. So you have something that is like a cell, right? It's a boundary and it's kind of sharp, but there's also constant change within. And at some point, the second cell splits off. So You make that call at some point to say, look, this is just a little difference. We could do subtyping, or we can just find a better word, right? Just use a temporary term that we agree upon if we need to make a distinction. But one of my leading heuristics is when the purpose changes, when you have a term and why you name it differently changes, not just you name it differently because the behavior is just orthogonal or whatever, but there's a different business purpose behind it, for example. That is a good reason to think about a second mental model, because now you have different stakeholders driving different behaviors, and over time it will evolve more and more outwards. So as Rebecca said, it's a judgment call, right? There is no binary or no hard boundary to say, now it's time. It's with experience, you'll get better, but you'll never be perfect by making this judgment call. This is why heuristics are so important in finding something that helps you with your gut feeling.
Yeah, and I like to use the power of 3, which sets you free, for the charmed lovers. Hello. But every time something happens 3 times, it's turning into a pattern. Yeah, thank you. So every time something turns into 3 times, so if I hear a confusing discussion about the same concept 3 times, I start to wonder and ask questions. Should we split it now or not? Right? That's usually my trigger. If I see it happening 3 times, then I'm going to ask for the decision in collaborative modeling. But the decision is a group decision, right? I'm not the one making that call. It's the group who makes the call. Is this really different? Should we name it different? I'm just there to guide. Usually my role is to guide the flow, right? As long as the people agree, for me, that's also important, right? And if they don't, if we don't want to make it a split bounded context, then well, let's not do it, right? Let's let them feel the pain.
Yeah, I think this is specifically important for Christina's initial question, or the question she relayed from someone saying, if the domain is too large for one ubiquitous language. I think that premise is mistaken, is kind of hard to say, but that's a weird premise, because there is nothing ever too large for a single ubiquitous language as long as the language works. It's only
as long as it's also non-ambiguous, of course.
Yeah, if you have an unambiguous, understandable language with a clear mental model, then you don't need more than one bounded context. But of course, there is a mental boundary of how much you can understand. So I can't understand all of a certain field. Right? I can't be an expert in all of physics. There are compartments, there's optics and quantum physics and so on and so forth. So those are different mental models. Even though the language is stable between all of those, probably, it's still, I would still separate the context, but that's for the purpose. That's for mental modeling to reason about a certain thing cohesively. And that's where the context boundary becomes important for me. And the language is just a guiding heuristic.
This was my first answer to her. Bounded contexts are to let us not, our heads should not explode. So we cannot, cognitive load, we cannot become experts in everything. So this is why I like this question and the evolution, because if you are in a small company with 5 people, you don't have the luxury to to split a lot of domains or subdomains or bounded contexts, because you don't have the power to do it. So you put everything in one, and your product is probably very thin. And then you learn and hire people and learn and discover different necessities, different needs. And then you have the capability to split it. But all these must be in place.
Yeah.
So the social part is given. And this is why I like this evolution. Like you said, the language is evolving, the company or the product is evolving, our understanding is evolving. And the other thing what I wanted to say, we are talking about mental models, but she's reading the book. It's on the part about the context. Put yourself in this context. You try. I know as I read the book, I was questioning myself. 2 capitals. What exactly is this? This is a really hard.
It's a curse of knowledge, right?
Yeah. We have to imagine how it was as we read the book.
Michael has something to say.
Yeah, there's something that I wanted to mention, and I think this was also mentioned indirectly already with the cognitive load stuff, and is also that I'm always looking for fluency in the language. You will have parts in the language where you have a lot of dynamics, how people learn, and you will also have parts in the language that stay constant for a very long time, because these are established things, or there are certain wordings which are a de facto standard in a given domain and something like that. And I think it may also be a good heuristic to look for that fluency in the language, that you manage to isolate the highly dynamic stuff from the very stable stuff, so that you don't get an ever-changing kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, of course, we are pitching a constant evolution, but with a matter of control there, and that's something that I'm also looking out very often when I'm modeling bounded contexts and when I'm looking at domains and things like that.
Yeah, so that's a classic. It's one of the types an architect looks for, right? Where's the change and what's the rate of change, I guess.
Yeah. There's
You
also
in language.
Sorry. There's also a very related heuristic that just triggered when you said changing stuff from stable stuff, and that's level of complexity. Level of complexity is also very often for me a reason to switch bounded contexts or to separate them, because of a very different modus operandi between them. When you have something like, taking the classical example, you have something like shopping, but it consists of a shopping cart and a suggestion engine. The suggestion machine is way more complex. You need psychology, cultural background, and whatnot. And shopping cart is basically putting stuff into a database, having a nice UI. You have very different ways of working. In one, you need, even beyond agile, you need open experimentation. In the other one, you need waterfall. That's great. Just do it, right? So instead of mudding the very complex psychology background now with also having to maintain a stable software, or making it really hard for people to build a good shopping cart because they also have to do experiments in psychology, right? Make it a context boundary, separate those mental models. So you can put two different teams or different times towards each mental model. Even though the language is stable, and so everything else could be the same.
No, you triggered me with the shopping cart, right? Because shopping
I like the
cart
fact
is
that we trigger
something
each other, yeah.
that exists for 15 years. And sometimes when I go into a company and they say, yeah, we're gonna model this and we need a shopping cart, and I say, why are you doing this? Yeah, because we need to. I say, but is this your core? Because if you're that's also a heuristic for me, right? If they out of the bat know this is a well-known thing, we know this for years, so okay, why are we modeling it then? What's different then in this situation? Yeah. And then I rather change the language, because else you're getting locked up in the concept of what a shopping cart is, what people have. So an interesting one is, I was at a company and they did questionnaires, and that's what they keep telling me, questionnaires. Yeah, but ours is a little bit different. So the first agreement I made is, let's stop calling it a questionnaire, because else we cannot let go of that concept of what a questionnaire is. So also what Michael said, right? If something is stable, and they say, yeah, it's a questionnaire, but it's like that questionnaire. I think that's what you said as well, Rebecca, right? In this case, it's different, okay? Let's not call it a questionnaire then, please. Let's give it a random name for now to start with and move on. And that triggered me, because I think that's usually important, is it really something that's stable, or are you calling it for the thing that's stable? And why are we building it then?
Yeah, I think this is one of the biggest dangers in domain-driven design and naming things, is when people start in the classical OOP sense to name the nouns, to name the things they work with, and then they try to put behavior towards those things, right? And that leads to really weird models sometimes. So what I figured is, when you start with behavior, you don't even need a class name. You just describe behavior in language. Like, when I do this and that, this should happen, or something like that. You describe the behavior. You can even do a coding prototype by writing a pure function. And then if you need private properties, if you need some state to make that decision, to make the behavior happen, then you can create a class with a random name, like you said, some fantasy name, and then make it descriptive the moment you realize what it's really doing. So oftentimes my class names start with Smurf Ding Dong, something like that, right? Just letters and gibberish. But once I realize what it's doing, it's sorting out which product goes to whom. I call it the class sorting outer which product goes to whom thingy. And then once I understand more and more, we'll get to a name, but the name is not important up front. The importance is the language of the activities, like what are we doing, what are we measuring, what are we deciding by, what happens in case that this fails. Like that's the really important part, because we're trying to model complexity. So if it's just about structure, that's usually not really deeply worth it to go into DDD route.
So before we move to the next topic, there was a nice discussion online about someone said, well, as a developer, you just need to experiment and learn. And I think it was Matthias who said, yeah, but a lot of things that you are learning now is already in books. Well, someone, and this is product placement for Rebecca, there's a really nice book.
It's free.
20 years ago. It's free
it's
now.
free. Yeah.
And I think, Marco, what you just explained, right? I guess it's part of this book. So
yeah.
I would everyone, right? Don't ditch books. Don't only read books that are new. There's so much value in these books from 20 or 40 years ago. A lot of them. So, shall we move to the next topic? Who wants to pick? Or shall we just move on to the next one, which is how to context map an existing domain?
Yeah, let's pick that one.
Yeah, let's go there, and let's move this one to the right. And here we go. So, who has something to say? The question was how to map an existing domain. Well, the quick and simple answer, put people in a room, do big picture event storming. But I think there's already a lot of written about that. But I think a lot of things, who can answer something, how would people do it before big picture event storming and map it? Or are there other ways we can do it?
Well, I would say, what kind of questions do you want to have answered out of your domain? I mean, there is a wide variety of questions. Do you want to take a look at how certain models propagate through the domain? Is that something you're curious about? So how are the systems coupled? How about the governance model between the teams? Where do you have customer-supplier relationships? Where do you have partnerships? What are the questions that you want to have answered? What is your goal with the outcome of such a context mapping workshop? What do you want to do with that? And I think that would be my first step, and then focus on the patterns that help you unlocking insights for answering your questions. Yeah, I rarely use all of the patterns at once when I map an existing domain.
I would agree, but that doesn't answer the question, right? That's just deflecting the question. I mean, you added context now, that's great. But given any scenario, how in the simplest case, let's say you have a company, they realize that their domain is really complex and they have many different experts, and now they have like 20 developers, and they want to really optimize their team structure to support the core domain the best way they can. How would you start about mapping that bounded context map? You know nothing else. What would you do tomorrow as an exercise, given you don't do big picture event storming, because that, as Kenny said, is a boring answer. If you don't do event storming, what would you do? What's the next step?
Take your map of your offices. You already said it. You have developers, and there are some conflict, I assume. I am probably is some conflict there, because otherwise you don't take time to map something. So it's something, an issue. The features are not flowing, the communication is not flowing. So you have already your people, your teams. You already can put some lines and arrows on your map.
That is when you're a product company, right? When you're building a product, you can already map your own development team and company, saying this is how I structured before. So this is my status quo, at least. This is how probably the contexts are bounded. That doesn't give us a context boundary within a team if a team has multiple bounded contexts to work on, but it gives us an initial cut of the team structure at least, and the team topologies map pretty well to context boundaries in most cases.
I think it also depends, just one remark. again, what questions do you want to answer? Maybe a first good step is to take a look at system boundaries and the responsibilities of teams. Yeah, most of the time, what I see very often are there is a system and there is one team or whatever being responsible for that. And I very often start with the assumption that this system is a bounded context, knowing very well that it's probably not. Yeah, but I treat it as one. And then I say, okay, you're integrating with that other system. What do you do with the model that they provide? Do you transform that? Do you have a shared kernel? Do you have an anti-corruption layer? Oh, we don't know. Let's take a look at the code. What are you doing? Yeah, so also looking into code. Yeah. Are they raising requirements against you?
Yeah.
Where are your open host services? Yeah, stuff like that. And
how you find out if they did something? How you find out if something is breaking or something is done what you need? How your refinements are going? So it's a social question. Putting the finger on some conflicts.
Yeah, when a company never thought about designing bounded context, you can still, what Michael says, right? Discover where they are now. And it can, most of the time, it ends up in a lot of big ball of muds or conformance pastors, what I see. But that strategic mapping really helps me to start with what's the current component or whatever unit of the deployment boundary, unit of deployment boundaries, and let's start with there and map it out from there. Always take a whiteboard. I have this nice BAM book. Not sure if you're familiar with it. And Marco has a digital, also non-digital, but this is my whiteboard. Right, and I always have it with me when I'm to the customer. Now I just have Miro. I will just pitch in Miro, of course, but usually I have this one and I just start mapping it for myself. This is really handy. And I know Eric Evans, I've been to his workshop, the strategic workshop, 2 days, and that's what you also learn, right? Well, here's a story. How would you map that out in a context map?
Yeah. Always bring your sticky notes with you.
No,
so I found.
May I add one more thing? When you start with those assumptions, also make those assumptions explicit. So first of all, we assume that a system is a bounded context, and then you dig deeper. So for instance, a few months ago, I saw a big mainframe system, and I assumed, based on the talk in the Slack channel and whatever, that this thing is going to be a mess. But it turned out, no, this was a very well modularized monolith with really nice vertically cut modules in it. So we said, okay, so this may be the system boundary, but we should refine the bounded context boundaries probably to those vertical modules in there. And let's continue with that. So, I mean, assumptions are there to be destroyed. Yeah. So by explicit knowledge and And
I think that's the power, right? Because usually when I go in, I never written COBOL. So when I would go in there, I was like, I don't know. I might be able to dissect it, but going to that bounded context and discover that bounded context, now the communication changes, right? Because now I know, these are the responsibilities of that system, even though I cannot analyze it in depth because I've never written COBOL. Maybe I can, maybe I don't, but at least now I can reason about the responsibilities that are in there and have a nice formal communication. So
I just had an idea for a communication starter there. So we had discovered 2 heuristics, right? One, I think from Michael, was system boundaries, looking at the systems, or Kenny, I don't know who said what, but looking at the existing systems and saying these could be initial boundaries, assuming also team boundaries in the solution space company, the company providing technical solutions. How are the teams structured? Those 2. We could take a third one, and that's the department boundaries or the department names from the problem space, right? The customer we're facing, how are they structured? What are their departments? If we map all 3 in visual clusters, seeing if they overlap or not, that could be a discussion starter saying, hey, if our systems match our problem and our solution space teams, it's all a perfect match. That's a very strong heuristic for we got it right somehow. Still an assumption we need to check, but that's a really good initial guess. If it's complete mix and match, then everywhere where it doesn't fit, we could have a discussion like, why are we building a system like this when the actual problem space looks orthogonal or different and is not aligned
So
with the solution?
start with the harder boundaries, right? Because a bounded context usually is not a real hard boundary. It's more of a mental model. Just figured a mental model, right? If I look at the UK, I can take that first as a bounded context, but when I zoom in, there's Wales and there's England and there's Scotland, right? And I might upset people now, by the way, but there are different countries in there. And even if you zoom in, there might be even more smaller contexts, right? But the hard boundary is simple, it's an island.
Can you define what you mean by hard versus soft boundaries? Because
well, a unit of deployment is really hard, and a team is also rather a hard boundary. I know these 5 people
because it's hard to change, or why?
No, they're harder set, right? If I look at when I go in
over the wire,
if
over the wire, you change your context. But I wouldn't agree with the unit of deployment. I can put 3 services in one and deploy it at one. So
yeah, but that's a start, Christina.
No,
that's a start, and then look at
it's interesting when you think about systems, because if you're microservice crazy, that leads you to a whole nother, kind of set of concerns about clusters of things that communicate and work together, fulfilling some kind of capability is quite different than if I have a monolith, big deployment Java, the Java of the early 2000s that are still in production. And so I worry about those hard boundaries based on kind of your architecture or even the team size, because it's not. I find a lot of variation in that actually based on kind of the architecture that people have and are living with or trying to live with right now.
Yeah.
I would think about impact. So if what I do of this part of software impacts only my responsibility, my team, then it is in my system. And it impacts other teams. I changed my contract or something. It impacts other teams or other parts of the problem space, then there is a boundary.
Another thing that I would like to mention is you can, in this situation, given the initial question, also play very nicely between problem and solution space. So how is the solution space structured? What's the current state? Now, when you do the big picture event storming stuff, I mean, you said, yeah, let's not jump into that. You can derive some ideas about a problem space, how you structure problem space, and then you can put them together and see, okay, where is the alignment really good? Yeah, I mean, okay, nice, good. But where do we have alignment issues? Maybe those are the first things that you may want to tackle. I mean, usually when you do these things on an existing domain, on an existing landscape of systems or a system of systems, I would assume you have the goal to change something. But where do you start? And I think that's something that I also play around with quite heavily in those situations.
Yeah, that's exactly the approach I usually take.
Yeah.
Big picture. Usually from a big picture, I usually see this is how we want it to be, right?
Yeah.
Our ideal feature. And if you do it on the current system architecture and you do context mapping on that, you can do that as well. That's your current, your current state, and then you can map out, right? If we keep this, so I usually use the ideal present canvas from Jay Bloom.
Yeah.
I see it like that. So it's see, okay, what's the next step?
Can you put a screenshot of that in the Miro board?
Yeah. Yes. I think it was the ideal canvas, ideal present. Yeah, and so there's maybe I can share my screen and show it. Is that okay?
Sure.
So this is by, let me open the Miro board so everyone can see it. So here you see the canvas. I've also put the link. So it's reproduced by permission by Ben on Jape. And I also use this for retrospectives, right? And I really like this canvas. So usually what you do is you start with, okay, let's look at the present mess. And mess, it's because it's complex, right? So it's a mess. People also already trigger, what do you mean a mess? No, well, it's complex, it's a mess. So what's good and what's bad? If we keep it like that, what do we end up with, right? If we keep it like that, what mess are we gonna end up with? Then, okay, how do you want the ideal feature to be? And then you can say, okay, what would we need to do today to deal with the present mess, to avoid the future mess and make the ideal feature more possible? So how I see this is, so how I usually use this map is say, I do a big picture and then with the people make a context map from that big picture. So no, sorry, that one is here. So that's the ideal feature, right? That's the alignment you want to be. And this is the current architecture, however you want to call it, which is a different context map. And from here you can map what's good, what's bad, where do we end up with, so what do we need to do today? Usually this is the approach I take. Is that similar to what you do, Michael? If he's still here, I think he left. You can see later.
Yeah, Michael, asking questions and then running away.
No, so this is how I usually conduct, but I'm a consultant, right? So this is how I usually go about in a company. And the present mess is usually on a lower team level, and the ideal feature is usually on a business level.
I like the heuristic, and I think you can stop sharing screen yet. I like the heuristic. I would love to see or to design myself a positive written form of that. This was a very negative perspective, still helpful, right? Saying this is a mess we're in, this is a mess we'll end up with if we don't change, and then there's
well, it's the good and the bad of the mess, right?
Yeah,
so there's good things about the present mess, and there's a bad thing about the present mess. The only thing is the future mess is the negative thing, and the ideal feature is the positive thing.
But the ideal present is what would we need to do to get to the ideal future? I also want to see the positives of the future mess. Like what would be good if we keep doing what we're doing? It's more than just a mess we're end up with. Yeah. We're ending up with a mess that also has benefits. And and I don't want to lose that perspective. So the good bad needs to go to the future mess as well. I wouldn't call it future mess. I would call it I don't know, the automated future, the thing that happens if you don't steer into a different direction. Designated future. I'm not good with words here. I don't know.
So that assumes that there's one future, which is something I question in a business. Yeah. And I say this because if we're on the current course, maybe that's what you're saying, Marco, but there could be potentials that we see. And if we just look on one ideal future, that kind of eliminates us thinking about potential futures. So I remember working long ago with Richard Gabriel, and he had us do some future visioning. This is back in the days when our two companies had merged. And he had us do scenarios, several of them, both good and bad and independently, and then came together. And, so needless to say, it was interesting because we got this range of perspectives that then we could perhaps go into the, here's where we need to go next.
So something I want to experiment next year with, and I haven't, is it's from Kinevin. It's the future backwards, and it sounds a bit similar to that.
Richard did this before David Snowden hit the scene, but in some sense, if you allow people to independently think about the future, they won't be affected by the noise of everyone else and all kind of lock in together. And that was interesting. And he made us do this, just independently, and then we would talk about it. And I was like, oh man, this is there's this future in that, but we could at least see the range of what people were thinking, which was quite interesting.
I know the classic Stoics do it. I'm not sure how they call it, but they will look at a what can happen and then prepare for what can happen, so that when it happens, they know what to do. I know the classical Stoic people.
Yeah, I like the idea of multiple potential futures because it's so open in the definition. I've seen that in the agile world, saying we're doing a future retrospective or a future postmortem, right? Like, hey, it's a year from now, the whole project was a success. What happened? And then everybody can envision a future that made it a success. That's basically the same thing. And then you start everybody on their own, then in pairs, then in quadruples, right? From the what's the book called? Can you help me out?
Liberating Structures.
Thank you. From Liberating Structures. So you go 1, 2, 4, and then all, so that you can start defining without noise, and then you exchange ideas in a pair, and then you move upwards. So there's a chain. But yeah, the future retrospective was always assuming a success, and the future postmortem always assumed a failure. But that's binary, right? And when something seems to be binary, a good heuristic is to think about a continuum. I've learned that from Matthias Varas. Always go one dimension up from where you are to figure out if there's something missing in between. So yeah, multiple potential futures is open. There is no constraint. And constraints spark creativity sometimes, so it's valuable. But specifically, if you look at these ideal present canvas, I don't want to see the future mess. I want to see all potential futures that you could envision.
Yeah. Now, before people's gonna spoil my Spider-Man movie, we're in a lockdown. I couldn't see it. It goes about multiple universes. Let's move on because I don't want to get spoiled
multiple
yet.
Potential presents, right? That's
good. So, what? Anyone else? Next topic. What are we gonna do? Who wants to see Michel? You're on mute.
Sorry, my computer is very slow. Zoom is like taking all the CPU. Yeah, I put two notes there for this topic, which was okay. There's a big picture with tools we all know, like event storming, domain-driven, prototyping even, and but there's also another way to catch with existing domains, which is observability. And not only the static code, but you can instrument your code, and then you can extract information with dependencies, and you look, those things seems to go together. Maybe it's not for the right reason, but now they are doing this way. And that's also a very interesting part of the insight. I was involved in a project where we had to re-platforms a few millions of lines of code that were supposed to generate paying roles with exactly the same results, which exactly the same errors, because they're always errors. So the question is how can you ISO functional, make this ISO functional? And I used intensively observability with my own tools. I mean, Datadog, and they were not there on the market at that level. And that helped to pop up some concepts, and then you use people's knowledge to discuss. So it's a matter of top down and bottom up, like breathing, inspiring and expire. So that's for me for this topic.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
So you were talking about bottom up and top down. I think there was a topic, right?
Yeah, DDD beyond code. This is a good one.
Yeah, let's go with that one. Who
From
put it
user
on?
experience, yeah.
Oh yeah, DDD beyond code. That was mine. So
okay, put it back.
Yeah, to put it back. Yeah, I think actually, well, let's just talk about it for a short while. But I was just asking myself, there are so many companies who do domain-driven design from a software development perspective, which is kind of because it's the subtitle of the book, right? So it all started in software development. But there are so many principles, heuristics, and methods in DDD that are massively useful for any kind of process, any kind of company, or even when you do not company-rated things. If you want to govern a country or organize a private party, right? There's modeling is helpful. Organizing language around mental models is helpful. Team topologies is helpful. Like almost everything, despite the technical patterns, can be used outside of software. So from product management to user experience design, where would you pull the boundary, or where would you say DDD stops being domain-driven design? Or would you actually say DDD goes beyond code? It is more a mindset, a philosophy of solving problems than of building software. So my question is, would you call it still DDD if you don't build software in the end, even if you do all the other patterns from DDD?
Nick already answered that. Have you read his article about DDD uppercase versus DDD?
Yeah. I read that. Yeah, DDD versus DDD. Doing domain-driven design versus what is domain-driven design.
Yeah. No, it was a short answer.
That is a short answer.
No, it wasn't an answer. For my part, I haven't found the boundaries yet. So I'm talking with all my colleagues outside of software development in DDD manner. I explain everything what we do, what we decide, and ask for their words, for their definitions, and explain what the consequence if I don't understand it, or if they thought about the consequences. So the consequences are not only on the software part. It's mostly not on the software part. It's mostly in operations or in other parts of the system. Software is written, okay, but the consequence is what happens to a product or to a company after every decision has an impact. Yeah. So everybody should understand why it is important and what's happening.
So I propose, and we should talk to Eric about this, but I mean, at least want to hear his opinion. But I propose that domain-driven design started as a software development methodology or philosophy, but it is system design, not software design. And by system, I don't mean electronical systems. I mean any kind of complex system. In the initial book, the specific focus was on solving business problems for logistic companies using Java, right? That's kind of like the focus of the initial book. But after 16 years of community, the same methods hold true for any complex system. There are heuristically some things you use more when you do software heavy things. There are some things you use more when you do more social driven things, but it's always complex system design, because even in your software company, when you make a bounded context map, some of those bounded contexts aren't even software systems, even if others are. So what if you just get rid of those who are software systems? You still do all of DDD, right? So maybe domain-driven design is not actually about software development. That's just where it started, like Agile. Agile started in the software world, but it's not about software. It's about complex system management.
So two things that pop to mind for me. I like what Matthias wrote there is, as long as you get a shared understanding of the problem space, right? That's the philosophy. I like that, the red sock patterns principles. Now, I think we discussed this before, Rebecca. The danger of labeling here DDD, right, is that, oh, you're only coming to do DDD. So I literally got this feedback where I'm now in my company, I'm more diving into how can I facilitate collaborative modeling, right? And then someone had a problem. So my manager told me someone had a problem with how to get information out from people. And I said, have you talked to Kenny, because he has a lot of these tools and principles. Yeah, I'm not really into that DDD thing. Well, that part I'm developing is not per se DDD. It's more on the social domain, or more on anthropology, or more on facilitation. So, well, you know this, right? Don't mention Fight Club. So I think that's a danger, and I try to let go a bit of that label, but I still think it is in the end. I still consider myself, well, trying to get a shared understanding of the problem space. Yes, That's the philosophy, right? And if you have a different philosophy that does the same, perfect. Let's call it that. I don't know.
Yeah, I think for the purpose of today, that's enough for me at least. I could go deeper, but it's not really important. I think there are so many better questions on the board.
So could we do bounded context for, I ask myself this question, and I'm not sure the answer yet, by the way. Could we do bounded context for business models?
Yes.
Yes.
A business model is a solution model, right? So you have a problem, you have a problem space that you try to solve in, and you structure your business in a certain way to serve better than other companies do. And that's your solution space, even if you don't do software, even if you just structure your people in a certain way. So a business model is a bounded context model is a business model, or
you name things.
Yeah.
So people will use the same vocabulary,
Yeah.
So it's also about knowledge, which is a little bit more static, where you don't necessarily have a very clear, unique behavior, but just you can note things, what you learn, and draw stuff, and also admit that you have different islands of approximative knowledge with sentences, because the knowledge comes very often from books, and books are made of paragraphs with sentences, and in those sentences you have connected information. So if you want to get more knowledge from the information you have to make it usable. You have to be able to navigate. So having maps and domains is very useful.
Yeah, and I've been to this, you probably all been to this company, right, where Excel is like one of the biggest things being used. Well, you could say that's also programming in a way, but these are people with a business background. For instance, you usually see it in risk management or in asset management, where people are building their own models in Excel, right? But they're not really software savvy. They just know how to do Excel really well. But I see these are also bounded contexts, right? I have a model to calculate A and I have a model to calculate B. If this is Excel, fine. If that's another program, fine. Yes, I still think bounded context still fit there, even though I'm not building.
When I do some domain modeling, especially with finance folks, I very often do that in Excel with them.
Yeah.
Let's build a spreadsheet.
And that's functional reactive programming.
Their language,
with names.
that's what they understand, and we can group some things together and so on.
And now you can do lambdas in Excel.
Excel is an awesome domain modeling tool.
So Mary Shaw has a name for people who are modeling like that, but also programming. She gave a talk at the Patterns Conference this year, or it was last year, excuse me. Anyway, calls it vernacular programmers. And in some sense, I tend to think vernacular programmers are people that don't view programming as a profession. They view their business as a profession. You ask a physicist, do that, whatever. And in fact, talking about the language and the preciseness of models is something that they really could, relate a lot to. Yep. And as a matter of fact, Mary is talking about this, that the vernacular programmers are going to outnumber us professional programmers. And they probably already do. And so I actually think that there's an opportunity for crispness of modeling techniques, clarity of that, that could be shared with those folks to quite a bit of benefit. It's not like you're going to make a lot of consulting bucks out of this, but the fact is that I think a lot of these techniques could be something that help clarity. Just like I remember, agile practices brought clarity to people who weren't necessarily doing software. But it's not the whole thing, but it's there is that potential.
What I always say there, Rebecca, is when you work with various people, they are at a given point of knowledge, and there is when you have a bunch of folks in the business who are thinking in Excel, I think it's really hard to move them, for instance, to a design level event storming workshop. I think it's easier, to get started where they are and get the ball rolling and get talking, and then maybe pitch in additional ideas, and maybe you mix certain things up. Yeah,
Right.
I've modeled aggregates on various sheets in Excel, and it was awesome.
Sure. It's hey, those are good little boundaries there.
Yeah,
that's what I like
awesome.
about.
And everyone understood it, and in the end, we had a shared understanding. Perfect, good enough.
So, were you doing DDD?
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think so.
Absolutely.
Sure.
That's what I like. We had this session a few months ago, right? This what makes you a good domain-driven designer at the virtual DDD website, and we uncovered that DDD is an open set of tools and methods. So, as you said, Michael, when you get people, you try to understand where they are, and you need to get them from there using tools that help them. It's not about doing DDD, right? You're not getting hired to do domain-driven design. You get hired to solve business problems, or to model something, or to uncover truth, and just using Excel, which is a functional reactive programming language, if you really want to figure it like that. But you can name things, you can structure things, you can aggregate things. It's a perfect tool for people who think that way anyway. But to put this into perspective again, right? The financial calculations, you can model that in Excel, but then once the result is there, some other department has to work with that. That again gives you a boundary where you put this as a message to the next system. And I'm not saying digital message, I'm just saying something happened and then somebody else has to react. So big picture event storming, to put an emphasis on that, even always helps, especially even in those cases, I mean, even if you do finance modeling, because there's always a boundary towards other people who don't work in Excel. And using different tools with different people.
And to be honest, I don't consider domain-driven design to be, first of all, a set of tools. I think it's a set of attitudes and ways of doing things and thinking about things. And then come the tools that help you in that. But that's a different discussion. I think
totally agree. I mean, that was the whole idea of it, is an open set, right?
Yeah.
It's a never-ending collection of helpful tools, as long as they fit the mindset to make you more domain-driven.
Exactly.
That's all it requires to be domain-driven. And that's kind of a self-definition, but
it's a black hole.
It's a black hole, right?
But this is the most important part, and this is what a lot of people, I don't think they don't understand. I think they don't think about it. And this is what makes me a DD. I think all the time about it. What makes the business going? Why should we go A or B in this future maps, future models? What was that? Future present. Because this helps the business, and this other one is only a pet wish of you. So you can you can argue about decisions. This is why I don't consider bound context is the last thing, not the last, but not the first thing what came to my mind. If you say let's do DDD, let's make decisions driven by the business, by the domain.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Totally same experience. Bounded context is something though that comes very early in existing systems for me, because it's a constraints. Understanding the status quo of your context gives you social technical abilities, understanding of the abilities at least. So if you want to change your system because you uncovered something, but then people are just, with inertia sitting there saying no, or you already have kind of an argument between two groups or technical systems that can't be changed, like you need to understand that to work in the option space that's possible. So whatever you do, it's not about bounded context mapping again, right? It's also not about event storming. Those are just the tools, and it's about making decisions and understanding. So there's always these two different, for me, major pillars. One is uncovering what's there, uncovering status quo and hidden truth, and the other is to design options. So in the problem space, I try to uncover more, I try to understand, and in the solution space, I try to design options, which is why we stopped calling, or we try to make it stop calling problem and solution space.
I stopped with it.
Yeah, me
I
too.
stopped
But
calling
I-
purpose and propositions.
yeah,
But,
purpose and proposal space. But whenever I consult people, I tell them, like, call it purpose and proposal space. But if you want to Google for those terms, use problem and solution space, because that's what the whole world is using. But there are better words for that. Yeah.
So there was this nice blog post by Sophia. She's not here tonight, but also talking about, not sure again, about her garden and how she would solve that, right? Redecorating her garden. I'll come look. And that's also a bit talking about DDD without software. And usually I also give the example now with Evelyn about moving houses, right? I have boxes to move houses in. I got certain problems, which is like painting my walls and creating cabinets, right? And both have a problem that goes into sanding. I need to sand the walls, but I also need to sand my cabinet. So where do I put that? Where do I get one solution, right? Which is a multi-tool where I can sand everything with? Or do I get specific tools? Do I get a specific wall sanding? And right, so it still works, but eventually I need to put it in boxes. And then my wife does maybe the cabinet making, and I do the sanding of the walls. And well, it would be awkward if we both buy the same tool then, right? For the same purpose. So here I try to get a metaphor out of the software world, and that usually helps people in the business. But shall we move on?
Yeah,
Before
let's
people
move on.
start trying out that Excel Lambda function.
I put
just
some
posted.
Yeah, I put some other stickies up front because, I mean, we three were here early, so our stickies are all on top. Let's not move on with our stickies, but let's pick this one here. What is an anti-corruption layer exactly in essence? Some from the tactical side.
Yeah, we had a whole meetup on that part with Julie.
Yeah.
And, I know Julie was there.
Because it was her biggest aha moment. Oh, this
Yeah.
is an anti-corruption layer. Now I know it.
I was there too, I think, as far
Yeah.
as I remember.
Yeah.
Well, great.
It was a
Everybody
funny-
who was there, could you summarize?
Just it. Yeah, just it.
Basically, an anti-corruption layer transforms a model coming from the outside to another model that you use in the inside of your bounded context. So it's basically a model-to-model transformation, which very often goes hand in hand with a language transformation, obviously. So you translate one ubiquitous language to another. Usually that's being done if you think in terms of an onion architecture or hexagonal architecture on the adapter level, but it can also be implemented as a separate microservice or something like that. I think implementation-wise, you have a lot of freedom. Yeah, the only thing that the bounded and that's something that is very important to me. Anti-corruption layer is not about complete decoupling. It's about a looser coupling on the outside of your actual domain model. Yeah, so I think that's the gist as far as I remember and my current thinking model of it.
And it's, yeah, and to add to that, because I totally agree, it's not just a translation. For me, it's also a signal that if you need one, then your upstream, it's a social technical signal that my upstream is not giving me information or model information the way I want it. So I need to protect myself. So it's a defensive pattern, in my opinion.
Yeah,
But also
which is expensive.
Yeah, it's expensive, and that's very important. Does it pay off to have one?
Yeah. So it's not only a translation; it's really
trade-off.
expensive. It's a trade-off.
Well, yeah, it's a trade-off. I wouldn't call it expensive per se. It could be the cheapest option. So if you work with a legacy system, for example, legacy is upstream by definition because it's unchangeable, right? So if you want to evolve, you can't tell the legacy to evolve because by definition it's legacy. So it's upstream. It dictates how to be used. And well, if you still want to integrate, but you don't want to mud your new model using the legacy systems technology or language, then an anti-corruption layer is the cheapest option you can have. You translate yourself with a small mapper. And this again is socio-technical, right? It could be just communication with humans or a technical system. In most cases, it might be it will be technical, but In that case, it's a really good decision. But if you have a customer-supplier relationship which is a bit too forceful, so you're not super happy as a customer in that relationship, and you decide to put an anti-corruption layer in, that is very expensive on the cultural level, because now you put a wedge in between two teams. You put a cultural blockade, a communication blockade in there. So now both mental models will actually evolve in different directions, and they don't have to synchronize because the anti-corruption layer takes care of that. And that works for a certain while. But after a while, you get so far apart in your understanding of how the communication actually should work or works, that if the anti-corruption layer doesn't hold at some point, if you need to adapt more than the anti-corruption layer could assist you with, all of a sudden you stand there with no way of talking to them. And it's a cultural cost you carry. It's a big risk you carry around. So it totally depends, of course, on the socio-technical relationship. But with legacy systems, in most cases, for me, it's the cheapest choice. It's the best way of building a clean model. Sorry.
So I know that DDD folks focus on the, upstream relationship and corruption. Who does the anti-corruption layer, being the one on the inside that wants to preserve it. But there's also another kind of good design practice that I think when I need information from legacy systems, or I have to have, actually synchronous, God forbid, communications with them or whatever, is that in some sense, I want to inside my system build a layer there, an adapter layer at that, so I don't corrupt my nice code with the downstream things that I have to talk to in legacy. Yeah. And to me, we talk a lot about, well, I have to translate what comes in, and that keeps it clean on the inside until they start changing it. And then I go, but there is this other side of dealing with legacy systems that I tend to building that insulation is so important, because it can just get corrupt coming in from the when you're a client to a supplier relationship too.
Yeah.
Have you read
that is still sorry.
One
thing,
Marco.
Kenny.
Oh yeah, no, because it reminds me of Eric Evans exposing legacy assets as a service in his DDD for surrounded by legacy article. His fourth strategy is exposing legacy assets as a service, where I think you do exactly that, Rebecca, but I'm not sure if you read that.
Well, I've written patterns about how to do that, regardless of DDD stuff or whatever. And there have been various patterns that people have written about proxies or adapters that apply with that. But the thing is, you do it because you want to keep the behavior and even the information on the inside of something in the domain, not mucking with other stuff. And if you just let a little bit in, it's like a virus, I'm going to say. Oh, well, of course, we're just getting this information this way, and now we can't start changing our code, and it can be really bad.
So to build on that, I think the whole proxy adapter architecture style, that is still anti-corruption layer, right? It's anti-corruption layer is not about message direction. It's not about I'm getting messages.
I know, but people often conflate it with the direction.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. Which is why the premise is always so important to say it's about model dominance. Who owns the model? Who owns how the communication changes when it changes? And who has more power over that?
Whatever information, wherever you're asking for it, or whether it's coming in at you as a request. Yeah.
And I think that's a good way. Maybe we should write a blog post of 10 myths of DDD, right? I think this is a myth, is that if you go to context modeling, the upstream downstream is about model relationship and not information relationship. That's the first thing I always try to iterate to people, because people think, oh, there's a line going there, not an arrow, a line. So I think that's a good one, Marco. We should write.
I got your hint. I got your hint.
Or maybe someone else does it. But I think that's a really nice blog post, common misconceptions about DDD. I think this is a big one. Anyone agrees or disagrees? Or?
I think in the whole context mapping patterns part, there is a lot of fussiness and a lot of misconceptions and a lot of differing opinions. Yeah.
But we know that Marco will build a new part in Virtual DDD about learning phases. So
Yeah.
you can start it there.
Wait, give me a second.
Okay.
Wait.
He's late. He's 2 weeks too late.
So before Marco starts finishing that, this was the quick gist.
I just wanted
Shall we
to
continue
add-
with the next one?
I just wanted to add.
Just one thing, I need to leave soon, so it was nice talking to all of you.
Yeah,
Michael.
Yeah,
thanks.
Michael.
Thanks for joining.
Yeah,
Talk to you later
I'll
next
stay
year.
for another 5 minutes or something, but I just want to.
Oh,
Happy New Year.
Yeah, you too.
Happy New Year.
Okay, let's say Matthias hasn't
I
said
think
anything.
Sylvesteren.
Matthias
right?
is going to pick the next topic.
Okay, that's interesting.
I didn't want to put you on the spot, so if you don't, it's also fine.
I think the low code one is pretty interesting.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so low code, how to model. Good question. Who asked?
Me.
Kenny, would you
No,
elaborate,
so-
please?
Yeah, so we were having this discussion internally, and Matthias is a colleague, by the way, and we didn't have this discussion, but me with another colleagues about low code, and we had a nice, interesting discussion, the pros and cons for low code, right? And I'm on the point, like, I like low code, especially in the sportive domain. If you use a bounded context pattern again, and it usually goes wrong when you don't. But you know, this colleague said the gist there was, yeah, but there's always more, right? It seems easy at the start because you really quickly can model something, but then there's this use case that's just off, right? And then you need to build on top of that, and then you need to build on top of that. So I would like to just know your experience, if anyone has some experience with low-code platforms and how to model that. I'm very interested in it because I still think it's really valuable, especially for the supportive domain, to use it, as long as you have a good software architect modeling those bounded contexts.
Yeah, so I have experience with that in my day-to-day use of Notion, for example. I've built my complete live operating system in Notion, and that's low code, right? It's click and point and data relations and a little bit of behavior as possible. You automate with Automate.io, like that's great. You don't have to code anything. You just click and drag your behaviors. And I've seen the good and the bad of it. The good is you can start quickly and you can adapt just by drag and drop. The bad is the model is only as expressive as the generic solutions have been built. Bye, Michael. But so from a software solution complex system perspective, it is a solution-based thing, right? So you model your domain first. So understanding the problem space, that's what you want. Once you know what you really, really want, and you figure out options, proposal space, what could we build? Low code is one option. Low code is constraining. So that's like choosing a programming language with a limited ecosystem, right? If you say, let's pick the newest language because it's fancy and it can do this specific Lambda trick, but it has no ecosystem, it's a constraint. And would that serve my purpose? Well, in a generic domain, sure, no problem. In some kind of outer supporting space, great. In your core domain with a complex business, you probably don't want to go with some kind of low code thing. You want to have more control, finer grained control over language and specific behaviors. So in my case, it was like private, right? I'm the only customer of myself. And if something doesn't work, I'll just use another tool and adapt quickly. So I'm the developer, the customer, and all in one person. That makes it simpler. That makes it manageable. But for a customer, I would never do that because in my core domain, I want to have more control.
So you're talking about two things, I think, Marco, that are important. It's the criticality of it and the evolvability of it, and also perhaps the scale. Maybe there's three things here. I think low code is like this attractive thing as long as our domain doesn't get, I don't know, a lot of pressure to evolve rapidly or add in different ways that don't fit that low code solution tool. And then we're in trouble. Then we have to add hooks, little prods, and I've seen that happen.
Yeah, that's what this colleague said, right? It goes wrong when the business logic is just a bit different than it's standardly supported in the tool. The visual models with logic is just too complicated. And so I think.
And then they start giving, and if your low code tools give you little hooks to start writing code and you start doing that, that's another indicator. I've seen that happen. Yeah.
So I think that's even domain modeling is even more important, and you can start with it as soon as it starts evolving to a complex thing, switch perhaps to something different, right?
Yeah.
But that usually doesn't happen, unfortunately.
So the thing that Rebecca said, or you mute Rebecca?
I said it never happens usually.
Yeah.
Never
It
seen
never
it.
happens usually. So the thing that Rebecca said about criticality, right? That's quite important, but scalability is really important there. I've done the small project with modeling everything in Miro, drawing how the process should work. Once I got that visualized and it makes sense, I built it in Notion, and now I use Miro as my model backup. And whenever I change my model first, then I go to Notion and apply the changes. I don't just low code something in Notion and hope I remember it in a year from now. But that only works in a low scale system.
And you have discipline. You are also having
you-
discipline.
You're a software engineer, Marco. So usually the people who are
Right.
building this don't have the software engineering experience that we
Background,
have.
yeah, right.
Background,
Yeah.
because that's the whole selling point, right? You don't
Yeah.
need software engineers, and you can just give it to someone. And I can imagine this. There's a lot of business processes that needs to be automated, right? Which isn't your core. It's just like, here's a process. There's a lot of being done manual. We just need to automate it. Well, it's simple, right? Just use some robot framework even, right?
I see a big opportunity here for the evil designers amongst us. We could sell them, you don't need coders anymore, but you need a domain-driven design expert to make that whole thing work for you.
But you just said
We're
you
selling.
don't get hired for domain-driven design, to doing domain-driven design.
Not yet.
I have a similar experience with, of course, I think we all start by drawing stuff, for ourselves, and then put a little tool. And actually, I don't use Notion, but I build my own tools. And when those tools were limited, I build new ones, and I build new ones using the old ones. So that comes as an experimental field with in the low code with low code features. And actually, the interesting part is that I have access to everything. And that was just to draft domains, and I call it my draft. Advertising.
Creative.
Yeah, very, very easy. And my draft was built in Java. And then because I needed to have evolution, of course, I added some, virtuality storage with Time Machine. And so you can add, change the structure, change the behavior, go back in time, which means what you have in Git, you put it in your own system and you compress the design time in runtime. And I managed to grow the system so that the most of it is not made in Java anymore. It's made in itself, and that covers pretty much the evolutionary, covers pretty much the value of examples. We quoted earlier with the Excel people. They need to express numbers, but they need their numbers. They need their formula there. So that's interesting. And I come to use the Aristotelian way, which combines, the three unities of classic drama with, unity of space, same space, unity of time. You do that very quickly in 2 minute iterations, and unity of action or unity of plot, where you can run a use case, a scenario, a process in a few minutes with some good example of real data. But what I didn't cover yet, Rebecca, is how can I scale that, to have huge numbers, to have everything multi-service, because I can't be everywhere. But I will get some help someday. Can ask for some help. Some people want to do that, and I was inspired a lot by people who build systems. So there's nothing new. It's an experimental. I can put the link there for the video, and
Yeah, please
and
do.
I'll be interested in having feedback from that.
Okay, cool. So Kenny, are you happy and satisfied with the topic? Shall we pick the next one?
Yeah.
Great.
I can pick the next one.
If you
Why
want
not?
to.
Or
Anyone can pick
let's
the next one.
see. Yeah. So
Corey, Igor?
Oh, this was the DDD culture shift. I'm not sure who put that on. The DDD culture shift, can organic bottom up work, or must it come from management?
Yeah, please
Anyone?
take that one. I have a strong
Anyone?
opinion on that.
We had a
I
session
know
already on
that's
that,
why.
but you can take it. Sure.
Yeah. Anyone? Oh, wait, I'll do this one because I know someone has a lot to say about it. Heuristics about starting to gather your own heuristics.
Yeah,
Sorry,
that was
let's go to
mine.
that one.
So since I saw Rebecca popping in, I was like, hey, Rebecca, great that you're here. Do you have some good heuristics about companies starting their own heuristics, like how to get started in that whole field?
Yeah, and I've actually recently had some new insights about that. As I wrote a blog post about that, is the too much salt story. But I'll share that link later. But the thing about heuristics, for them to really stick is, and this is my message today, if I want to say, here's why we want to try something or do something, I think we don't just explain what we want to do, do this, but we need to say why. And so I think a good way to talk about, well, how do I do event storming, or how do I do separation of concerns, or how do I adjust a model? Picking a topic that people have some interest in as a company, and talking about, well, here are all the things I do, and I'm going to say we do, and here's why I think this works in this case. What's the why behind the what I'm going to do, and building up a library of those. You could start with stickies. I tend to these days write little gists if they're good. Like, these are things we want people to know about. But it's also the case that heuristics can be at different levels. And sometimes people don't know the why of what they're doing. They're just doing something. And so here's what I always do, is not, to me, a very good heuristic unless you can say why, if you want to teach someone else to think and use it independently. So I would say pick a topic, come up with the fact that there might be alternative heuristics that we could apply here, and what kind of outcome do we expect, and then just capture them. I tend to think a sentence or a paragraph about it, if it's a really juicy one, and the why this works for me kind of explanation, or if there's something behind it. Like, it could be, well, back in the days we didn't do functional programming, now we are, here's what's different about it, why, whatever the topic is. Event records design, it could be anything.
What do you think of the counter heuristic, to say that for every heuristic, find a opposite heuristic, a counter one, with another why, so you can actually choose or understand trade-offs?
Well, there might be the same even why I do it, actually. But yeah, if and I don't want to say everything always has a counter heuristic, because it might have several counter ways of doing things. I mean, I hate to say that. So for example, if I want to write unit tests, what are some good strategies to start where I don't have tests? What are other ways to achieve what I want to do without testing? I mean, just be radical. So this is one thing that I learned from Matthias for us, is like, assume that you don't have, one of the tricks that he does when he's trying to pull out heuristics is assume a radical opposite position. Well, what if I didn't do this? And how can I achieve it? So, there's turning the dial up to 11 or whatever. And then there's always just removing this thing that I like and seeing how I could compensate. I can tell you that another way to get heuristics is to write some code together or work on something together and say, well, how did we, there might be a sequence of heuristics that kind of work for us, not just one.
Cool, thank you.
Anyone else has something to say?
Meta heuristics, yeah, heuristics that guide me, yeah. Those are good. So I also think there's values that are underlying our heuristics, and assumptions that we make. So sometimes surfacing those helps you get a more nuanced understanding of your heuristics. Do you ever have a disagreement with someone when you're working on something? It's probably because your values are slightly different.
Okay. That seems to be a loud end of the discussion. So thank you. Yeah, I got what I was looking for. Next one. Let's pick this one here. Will you name APIs with same ubiquitous language which is used in bounded context?
Ooh.
Oh, that's a good one.
No.
No, yes, it depends.
Okay, we're done.
No, I mean,
Let's
it's not
move on.
it's not a good one. It wasn't the answer. No, that's
Well, we picked now.
Okay, then.
We picked. Yeah. So I just want to speed it up. So
why don't you think it's no, before we go in, why don't you think it's a good one, Christine? I'm curious.
Because you cannot answer it. It depends on everything. It depends on what language I am using. It depends what kind of APIs. And it's an implementation detail.
So let's ask the
it's not
person
interesting.
Let's ask the person who proposed this question what they actually meant by it, and then we might have an answer or not. So who was asking this?
And is that person still here?
Are you with us? Can you hear us?
Could be
Zoom sessions
Miro.
are not on seances.
Could be YouTube too. Somebody from YouTube.
I guess not.
Kenny, you can take a look with right mouse button info.
No, because someone moved it and I created the sticky. So created by last modified is me now.
So then it's your question.
I can look back into the board history in the event stream.
Never mind. No. Don't spend too much time on something. Well, so I mean, Christina, to take your point, right? It's hard to say because it depends on everything, but that's exactly the point. That is an important answer here. There is no definitive yes. You wouldn't use the bounded context language as an API on the outer side of the context every time, but you also wouldn't do it never. It depends on the socio-technical relationship. If you have like a pair,
there's heuristics here that I always forget the name.
Good example. Yeah, that's a good example.
Yeah.
Opposing.
Marco.
Opposing. Thank you. Opposing heuristics here.
Yes.
There's a lot of them here, I think.
Yeah.
And it requires a whole session.
The question is what is this API? What is its role?
Sure. I mean, in a very concrete case, right? You can make for every specific case, you can make a very specific statement. But as a broad answer is like, if you have something benevolent, like an open host, you would probably design an API that is stable and that doesn't evolve at the same pace than your own internal language. If you are on the bottom end, if you're a downstream victim of the upstream changes, you might give them whatever they want. So you change the API because they want to, but your internal model stays the same until you reach a breaking point and build an anti-corruption layer even, right? So this is kind of what it depends upon. And in a pairwise relationship, it's kind of a mutual design. We talk about it together and probably we understand each other, or we decide that because of technical or social reasons, let us just conform to whatever you're doing. Then you have conformist pattern, and a conformist, of course,
So,
the ups. Yeah, well, anyway, this is giving you
so
a broad
gist
spectrum
is
of
strategic context mapping. Context mapping for strategic patterns. Start there.
yeah, that's a one big it depends here, depending heuristic. That's not the only one. There's also technical reasons that are maybe, well, I think they still might be bounded context specific or context map specific, but let's say there is a multitude of reasons why you would want to or not want to. You have competing heuristics and have that discussion between technical and social reasons and map the trade-offs. So yeah, context mapping, that's the answer.
And when you have those discussions, you know, there's also the issue of who decides and how the group decides.
Yeah.
And that probably depends upon the relationship between those interested parties. I do think that autonomy is a good thing. So on the other hand, you know, going to the trendy thing is not necessarily the best thing to do.
Yeah.
So subsystems don't like your autonomy
No, but
because they say you need to integrate this way. Okay.
You also have something like corporate design,
Absolutely,
corporate
yeah.
marketing. Yeah. This is what millions of questions. Which API? API from me to Marco in the same company. It's our discussion. We discuss it depending on
right. Mm-hmm.
But the rest, marketing is really important, and the API design is really important if it's going outside. And maybe today it's an internal API, and tomorrow somebody says, "Oh, nice API, let's put it make it public."
Yeah, and sometimes, especially in these things like mortgages systems, they have this already designed language, right, where you need to integrate with.
They do. There's standards. Yep.
There's standards. So that's your API, period. And you're in what Marco said, your internal model would be different, but still, this is what they need.
Yeah,
so
but then
there's your API.
It's still context mapping because you now have a published language from an open host that everybody conforms to, right? But exactly. Rebecca just said something as a side note, which completely blew my mind for a second, because I was like, I never thought about that. Within a bounded context, who makes the decisions? I always assumed, and that is a big mistake now, I always assumed a bounded context is a team, and the teams, of course, work in unison, right? They make decisions together.
There's some social ranking going on there.
Oh, yeah. I guess I spent time at a very large company for a couple of years, and I've been recently doing workshops on decision making, and the thing is that you think you understand the decision making process in those large companies, but you totally don't. It is not so nicely structured as Germans would love to have it, particularly if you have an international company. Anyway, it's, yeah.
I had that example, Rebecca, in a large enterprise, not Dutch, somewhere in the world. They came to me, they say, we need to model something new. We want you to do, because they read big picture event storming, then go to a user story map, then model the bounded context with the business, and then create user stories out of that so the teams can start working with that. And I was like, should I? I will, no, of course I will go into that discussion, but that's the way their decision-making took place. So, okay, was a nice discussion, but still I had a colleague who actually went into one of these companies and wanted to explore their architecture. And he let them on Miro model the current architecture, right? And then he started asking questions to one of the architects. And then he got all sweaty and he was asking questions to someone behind him. And then all of a sudden on the board, you saw another architect deleting all his stuff. Because, maybe he's going to ask questions to me, right? And that's, especially if you come in as with a DDD mindset, we want to do it collaboratively, right? But that's not always how the world works.
Yeah. Yes.
Or the companies work.
The
It's
mess we're in, right?
very, very much not how a lot of companies work.
Yeah, you can go against it, but I won't I won't change. And who am I to say that this is better, first of all? Secondly, if it is really better, I'm not going to change that in 3 months or 6 months, 1 year.
Yeah, I mean, culture change is something you can't bring from an external point of view. You can't be the consultant to change the culture. You can only help when they want to be helped. But I mean, that's a kind of a placative truth. But what I was really thinking about now is, if the structure within a bounded context team isn't like democratic or unanimous, like, do you really have one relationship between two bounded contexts? Do you have multiple relationships to different parts of the group? And therefore you can't just have an upstream downstream. Maybe you have customer supplier relationship on the technical level because that's what the team leads want. But then the bottom part, the people below the team lead, they have a partnership relationship, ignoring whatever upstream says, the higher ups, and your actual context map looks very different from the system context map. Like,
yes. It's like what the architects draw versus what the teams implement. Oh, absolutely. This happened at that company. It's just like the follow through of what you agreed upon. And anyway, it really is that complicated.
This is
real life. This is reality. Alberto said it's not your perception is going online, but what I'm implementing. So
that's what Eminem sings about, right? Snap back to reality. Oh, here comes gravity. Sorry, let's move on.
So, Christina, you were unhappy with my choice. You choose the next one.
Actually, it was a good one, and I noted your answers.
DDD at play here. Change minds, change perceptions.
Every time. So
let's pick a final one before we close off.
Final one. What I want to find. I have a final one which is not on the post-it. How was your year? What did you remark? War stories, happy stories, evolution. In a very short time.
Well, I can give you a 2-minute version of my year, which was very quick. I quit my job in the company that I worked in for 14.5 years, doing domain modeling with shift planning. And I was doing a side gig as a consultant in DDD and trainer for about 10 years or so, for a few days a year. And now I became fully employed. And since October the 1st, I was completely sold out until December 23rd, which was massively surprising. So there is a huge demand on DDD trainings and consulting at the moment. And the flood is just coming in and it doesn't stop, which is amazing. So something we do in the virtual DDD community works. And I don't just mean us 5 people here. I mean, the whole DDD community. People really want to adopt it. And now to the message I want to send there, I see a danger popping up all of a sudden, because after so many customers realizing, oftentimes management got me in. 5 years ago, it was always the programmers asking for consulting, like, can you help us become better at modeling domains? Sure, I can. And now a lot of managers actually got me in to train to their programmers how DDD works. And they wanted them to be better at keeping appointments or estimates with DDD or something. And it's like, the fuck are we doing here? And then those managers weren't part of the session and the domain experts didn't show up. It was just programmers. Even though we had a scoping call explaining the whole thing, saying we need a group, it would be great to have stakeholders from all departments, right? 50-50, business and developers. It's a culture shift and so on. Everybody was like, yes, 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 yes. And then 20 developers turn off their camera, enter the Zoom chat, and let me explain programming for 20 hours. And afterwards, some companies even asked if I could write them a certificate that they took this course.
Oh, man.
And that's
Here we
like,
go. Certificates. I'll
Yeah.
write you one.
and this is going so much in the wrong direction. And without naming names, there are other companies in Germany that provide certifications or architecture points you can get for some exam, right? When you do their DDD
Right.
courses.
I know those people. Yes.
Yeah, ditto. And that's why I'm
Me
not
too.
naming names, because strong emotions here. But
Mhm.
yeah, it's like, we're doing a good job. DDD became so popular and it helps so many people. That's great. But the same thing that happens to every topic that becomes more popular, other people see it and say, hey, we can do that too, and just put the name on their trainings and say, we also teach that now. And we as a community should do something about that in a helpful way next year.
That's an interesting perspective. So I crashed this party. I'm going to say what happened to me over the year. At the end of August, I no longer worked for Agile Alliance. They readjusted their priorities. And so my part-time gig, which I had done forever and ever, helping them with experience reports and actually curating them and inviting people, some of you have done that, to write them. They just didn't want to invest in that anymore. So at that point in time, I had to get over it because I realized, yeah, organizations change. Agile Alliance is a big conference company that is now kind of focusing on live events for members, and they don't value the written, reports as much as I thought, which fortunately freed up a lot of space in my head after I got over feeling crappy about that to start writing myself. So that actually is a good thing. But I also had a client that I've been working with for 10 years. They finally got acquired. The CTO that I'd been working with became the CEO. And so I'm now out of having this long-term modeling design architecture discussion that I've had for years. And so I've been going through a number of interesting changes. So it's a mixed bag. You kind of have to let go of things and realize that organizations change. And what Marco is saying about the community kind of reminds me about Agile. Started out crisply and then became this certified. And I don't think DDD is there yet, but it's a dangerous step that people want to start certifying things and saying that you're a good person. And we just put batches of our programmers through training without the business being involved. It's kind of worrisome to me, just like where I've seen Agile kind of go into the fluffy coaching only part of it.
Yeah.
So go on to that certification. What happened? I had a nice story that at the beginning of the year, I did a big picture event storming online for a customer, 3 times 3 hours. And they started context mapping together with the business. It's a skill up. It's really nice. And the business was on board. And out of those context map, they redraw they have problems with the product boundaries. They had one product, but internally they had 4 teams. So based on the context map, they did a reshuffle of the teams. So they self-organized that reshuffle based on the context map I helped them create. So that was really nice. And then with the teams, I trained all the teams on DDD. And then I also did coaching on the side. And I had another colleague who did also coaching with the teams, helped them. And for the first time, the product owners were totally on board and were taking the stage with this. And I'm like, this is what I want, right? They're the people you want to thrive. And the teams were happy because now all of a sudden, the product owners were happy because they were saying, now I have options that I can go towards. Well, I have business cases from my developers and they speak my language. They can tell me crisply, if you want this, then these are the options in that shared language. I was like, oh, this is great. It took a year and it wasn't a full engagement, but was a side engagement, but really nice to start training them. And I trained their architects and someone else. And now in 2 weeks, they're going to do another big picture event storming, which they will facilitate, and I'll be on the side coaching. So
That's awesome.
for me, that's like my pivotal thing, like, yes. And that's going into certification. This is what I want, right? I don't want to give them certification, but I want to give them a journey to go through. And it doesn't mean I need to upsell myself 100%, but this is step by step, because the developers are really, really, really smart people. I don't need to teach them coding. I just need to help them create that shared language with the business. And that really helped. And that was like, yeah, one of my major successes this year, I must say. And I'm really proud and happy to do that. I'm gonna, and to give you a sneak peek, next year, together with a colleague and another one, I'm gonna start writing a book. It's almost done, and about doing facilitation of collaborative modeling. So how to make collaborative modeling decisions and all these social parts. And, well,
Awesome.
one colleague you already probably can hint, right, which will be Evelyn, of course. So
yeah, David, we all did.
Yeah, so I'm really, really happy. And then another customer took a wrong turn. That also happened. So I want to talk about that. So another customer took, which I was really engaged to, which we built something from scratch with them, needed to set up their whole environment, then a change of management, and it went totally left, right? All the work we've been done went away, and rightfully so, but still it hurts, right? So the decision I can understand, right? But it's still, man, 6 months of tough work and building up with the team and then going left, and that hurts, and that's okay. But sometimes you also have these stories, right? I don't want to only talk about the successes. There's also stuff that goes different. For
I want people
okay.
I want people to write failure stories. If anyone wants to write a failure story, I would happily help you write a failure story if there's a lesson to be learned from it. Most people.
Yeah, so the lesson here was, I had this gut feeling that we were also building a new product inside a product company, but we're also setting up the current architecture because there wasn't. And in my gut feeling, I was like, we need to go faster with the new product, but we're also taking time to help the other product stabilize, right? Because we needed to go to the cloud. So that means the other product was going slower. And well, maybe we should have done something there. So in my gut, I was like, we need to go live more quickly. And we were just about to go live after 5 months, which is not fast in my opinion. But we also did all these other things. And how would you, yeah, that took a big toll on me, I must say. And learned from it. I still think it was a correct decision, but not a good outcome, which happens. So a win and a learning thing.
Yeah, Michael, what wanted to say?
Yeah, I was inspired by this example of working in remotely with multiple teams in the same time from the same company. I won't name. Very nice people, and what I was inspired by a kind of exercise that was new for me, because usually, you run team buildings pretty often with sticky notes, and because of the pandemics, we did that with Minecraft. So I ran a series of Minecraft for Scrum, and the most interesting one was Minecraft for Scrum at scale. So what really happens is we ran 3 different teams in the same time, and we had some rituals of scale. And the whole story is like, you go on a different planet, you have the whole metaphors. And at some point in the real life, they had a red incident, one team. So they had to go back to Earth. That was the real thing. Usually you prepare stuff, that is unexpected. This is the agile thing. And they went there, they fixed it, they came back, and they managed to finish the sprint because they, the acceptance criteria were loose enough to, to get it. And that was very interesting for the story. And what they learned from that, is that they managed to exchange information, to collaborate in a spontaneous way without any manager telling them what to do, when to do. And that's the bright side. Okay. Now, the darker side is that at some point in September, we have a huge deadline with one of the teams, and we definitely need to stop the rituals. So the usual way to do it is to say, okay, I'm stepping back. I'll let you, cry and go in the wall, and we can make a retrospective in January 22. But I kind of stayed there, and I was very proud that everybody dealt with everything. So they had problems, but they managed to do it, and they did it with this fluency of exchanging from among those three teams. And people didn't know the context technologically and from the business point of view. So it was interesting with those both sides. And I'm finishing now working with that company. So I'm opening to other ideas. And I have a huge bunch of failure stories, so we can talk later.
Nice. Thanks.
I want to join that Minecraft server, by the way.
Yeah, we can do that next time. We can set up server for that. Right.
Anyone else before we're gonna wrap up? So who else wants to share a story?
I have only a short story, so it's not really a story. I changed jobs, just like most of you, and I'm still at the same job, so I didn't change twice, which is a good thing. It is a really small company, very, very open-minded, absolutely transparent, and we are talking DDD all the time. We don't use one context words like metaphors or words, but we are talking business, and they love it. They are really happy for it. I send screenshots and links and keep them in touch. How the evolution is, and we have a very, very tight exchange. So it is, and I am repairing some small shortcuts made a few years ago. It takes months, and everybody is realizing it. So it's everybody understands what is to take domain-driven decisions, and I understand why you have to take other decisions if the context is not allows you the money, the time.
That's really
so
awesome.
It's okay, and I'm not twittering too much because I'm so busy. So I really I'm working all the time, and I love it.
That's quite an improvement. I'm very happy for you. That's really cool.
It's quite an improvement. I wanted to jump from this 20th floor, so
Yeah.
It's a huge improvement.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would like to add another failure story. If no one else wants to add a story, let me put that at the last spot. Okay, no one is going for it. Awesome.
It fits good to this year, which was a mess.
Yeah. I had a failure story just recently, just 2 weeks ago. Negotiations with a customer before, during, and after the contract. So a customer approached me not directly, but through a company that finds experts. And the expert finding company, I was negotiating with them, right? They were trying to get a DDD expert in, and I gave them my day rate. Say, this is my day rate. They said, great. And then they sold me to the customer. Customer was happy. We had a scoping call. They were really happy. And we started working, or we started making out when to work, when to do the appointments. And then the first day approached, but I still didn't have my contract. There was stuff to negotiate it. And when I got the first contract, I was like, oh, this says something about 30 hours or so with an hourly rate. Like I explicitly said I do day rates or half day rates because learning can't be estimated, right? I don't work 6 hours exactly to the clock or 8 hours or whatever. If everybody's energy is low after 4 hours, we stop. If everybody is high energy after 9 hours, we continue. Like, Don't put a number to it. Just a half a day or a day, that's like my rough boundary. So, and then they said, okay, and the customer paid them by the hour. And now we agreed on 5 dates per 6 hours, but a day rate was calculated as 8 hours. So they said, yeah, no problem. Instead of doing, you should do 30 hours, right? 30 hours, that's 4 days for you. So we pay you 4 days, and that's great. I'm like, yeah, that's great for you, but I still have to work 5 days, 6 hours each, and maybe longer if we discover stuff by the end, right? So, and even if we stick with 6 hours, I cannot sell the next day. So there was kind of like this data modeling in date formats, and like in my head, it was immediately like, hey, we have 3 bounded contexts here, 3 different companies with different language and different expectations. We need to model this. I have a great idea. We could use sticky notes and go to the wall. But yeah, the company I was consulting for, they were starting with collaborative modeling. So they were open to the idea, but had no experience. That's why they wanted someone to teach them. The company in between was a very classical London-based, I'm not going to name names. We find an expert and sell them for you company. Non-negotiable, non-collaborative modeling, none whatsoever. And they tried to convince me and say, Marco, look, the customer really liked you after the first 2 days. So I started working at some point, and they will hire you next year multiple times. So you could just, do the 5th day and that's good. I was like, okay, no. And then I really started to build up a Miro board and talk to them and model what happens to whom. And I'm a single employee. I'm a person, right? If I lose money, it's my money. They are a big company. They made a communication mistake. And I wanted to teach them like, hey, would you like to have a DDD training? This is how a contract could look like. Talk about outcomes, talk about the importance of time as I see the question here on the board from someone, right? Would you model daytime as a value object and why? Like, here is your freaking why. Yes, you want to, because there is a innate value behind time based on your domain. If you sell someone's time, there's euros or dollars connected to those minutes and hours or days. And
Eric did a whole talk at Explore DDD on it, right? And other conference where he wasn't actually on time. He started 5 minutes late, which was funny, right?
He's never on time. So it's actually interesting about the value of work. And I actually, thinking about Agile Alliance, I've been putting in so many hours that I haven't been counting. It was just like, I'll bill 25% time at a reduced rate because this is a value. But then they go, well, maybe she'll just do it for free, because we don't want to pay it anymore. It's like, no. So I think saying no to things when people start taking a different, that there are assumptions about you, it sets you down on a bad path. So
totally agree. And personal pride and money aside, that's not the point here. My point was domain modeling is actually something that would have helped, because their business model is actually selling people's time.
Right, exactly.
For money, that's like, and some people have day rates, some use hourly rates, and the whole contract, if you ask me, should be about extreme contracting, right? Don't sell hours or days in general.
Yes, and if someone wants to discount, that's another dimension of that, based on guaranteed work or whatever. Yes, that's a really nice domain to model. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool. I think this was it. Right on time. Thanks everyone for being here. So the Miro board will stay open with everything, and I'll post that. So there was some interesting questions still there. So we're gonna take that. We'll be back next year, wrapping up or building up some new topics. I already see perhaps an API topic popping up here. That would be a nice whole meetup discussion probably. But let's see. Thanks everyone for sharing your stories, and thanks for being here, and I hope to see you next time in the next year, and enjoy your end of year.
Yes, Happy New Year.
And I'm going to stop the stream.
Happy New Year.